Welcome back to another episode of the GCN Tech Clinic, where I try and solve your bike-related problems. So if you've got one, make sure you leave it for me down there in the comment section below, and I will do my very best to try and solve it in a forthcoming episode. And well, with no further ado, let's crack on with the first one this week. And it comes in from Tom Holden, who says, "Hi GCN, do you think higher-end aluminium clinchers for rim brakes will be extinct or go extinct?" Yeah, I reckon they will at some point or another. The reason being, I guess, exotic materials like carbon fibre, their price will continue to plummet, and it means that they will ultimately replace aluminium wheels, I guess, as will technologies in braking performance, so better braking compounds from brake pads, and ultimately, I guess the disc brake will probably lead to the death of the rim brake. After all, it happened on cars. I know they weren't with rim brakes, but they had drum brakes and now they're disc brakes. And well, most cars tend to come fitted with those these days, especially on the front. So yeah, one day it will become extinct, but right now, I don't see it, at least for about another 10 or 15 years. Next up is Wayne Filer, and Wayne says, "Hi John, I put on cyclocross tyres onto my hybrid bike to use it as a commuter and needed the extra grip. There's less than a millimetre of clearance and sometimes they rub underneath the brake caliper. Is there anything I can do to help give me a little bit more space and stop the rubbing?" Right, personally I would go for something with a smaller knob on the actual tread of the tyre. The reason being, like you say, it's less than a millimetre of clearance. Now that is really, really close. A few extra pumps in the tyre and it's probably going to rub. Either that, or if you get a little bit of something or other caught inside of the tread pattern, that can start rubbing underneath the underside of that brake caliper and actually damage it. And ultimately it could be quite dangerous, I guess, if something even bigger than that could catch in there and throw you over the bars or anything. I don't want to be a scaremonger, but I'm just thinking about the worst possible situation because I don't want you really to use this. I would go for a different tyre. Try and get something with a lower profile to try and clear that nice and easily. Now, something which we used to do on grass track bikes, which aren't actually a thing, but in Britain we have grass track racing, so it's like racing on a velodrome, but it's outdoors on grass, and you fit cyclocross tyres or tubulars into a track bike. Now, track bikes, as many of you will know, don't have particularly big clearances, especially on the front of them. On the back, you can generally play around a little bit because you can adjust your chain line and stuff so you can get it further away from the seat tube. But the front wheel was always a problem. So imagine that this is your axle of your front wheel, and this is the dropout of your fork, just going over it. And of course, the axle is going to sit really close into that dropout. But what we used to do was just in between them, put a ball bearing in there, and it would just push it away slightly from the crown of the fork just to give you a little bit of extra clearance. Not the safest thing in the world to do. I never had any problems with it, and it was a bit of a pain in the backside to fit, but that could possibly be an option, but I wouldn't really advise it, but it's just a little bit of a tale there, what I used to do in the past. But really, just try and get yourself a lower profile tyre. Right now, we've got Mr. Eric 5452, who says, "Hi John, what type of cable do I think is best? A normal stainless steel one or a Teflon coated brake cable?" Right, Eric, I would say personally a Teflon coated one. That way you're going to get nice smooth braking. There's nothing worse than a slightly stiff or not a little bit juddery almost when you try and pull the cable, because they can get caught just very slightly on the inner coil of outer cables. On the inside of the outer cable you've got this coil, and if they're not lined with a liner, cables can get a little bit trapped and sticky in there. So I'd go for Teflon cables personally, and also all cables are not created equally. So a more expensive cable, generally, as a rule of thumb, will be better performing than a cheaper cable, although obviously that's not always the case. But normally there's a little bit more research and development gone into them, hence the extra added cost. Personally, the best cables I've found for complicated braking routes are something like Jaguar's linkage system, or Alligator iLink, or Knock-On. That was the first brand I think who did that. So it was a series of small little parts of an outer cable which you joined together, and they were highly flexible. Other than that, the Shimano Dura Ace brake cables I found to be really, really good too. So yeah, personally go for those Teflon coated ones. Next up is Mohammed Patel, who has got another cable question. This one is there a way to stretch new brake and shift cables before fitting them? I noticed that they stretch a bit within the first 2 to 3 weeks of replacing the old ones, and I have to constantly make minor adjustments. Thanks and regards from South Africa. Right then, Mohammed, there's no real easy way to try and stretch those cables like we say. generally the cables themselves aren't actually stretching. What's happening is that the ferrules you put on the end of the outer cables, they tend to push themselves into position when we pull hard on the brake cables. So generally when we fit our brake cables, we put them in and then we give a few sharp tugs on the brake levers themselves just to try and sit all of those cables into the ferrules and then the ferrules into the components where necessary, and that takes up a little bit of slack. Then we readjust the inner cable, pull it through a little bit, and then it tightens. They don't really stretch because, well, they're pretty tightly bound anyway, those Bowden cables. You mentioned also in there about shift cables too. I wouldn't go shifting really hard or anything like that to try and get them to stretch or trying to get any ferrules to sit further onto the actual outer cables or anything. The reason being, the ratchets inside of gear levers are a little bit fragile, whereas inside of a brake lever, well, they're quite rudimentary really. It's quite a simple bit of kit, but those those gear levers, you want to make sure you don't go overstressing them. So just simply go out on the bike, and you will have to adjust that barrel adjuster just slightly, just whilst those ferrules and outer cables just find themselves sitting into those components nicely. Right, next up we've got Rinks Dinks, who says, great work with the show, John. Thank you. I currently have a Derailleur R9100 5339 chainring setup, and sometimes I feel myself spinning out on 5311. So will a Derailleur R9100 55T, 55 tooth obviously, outer chainring fit on my current Derailleur cranks so I end up with a 5539 setup? Yeah, those will work absolutely fine. The gear shifting at the front there may be a little bit slower than your previous one. The reason being, obviously you've got a bigger gap to actually contend with, but it will work fine. I've used a 5439 before and it's been fine. You've got enough room on the actual front derailleur mount to be able to position a 55, no problem there. What you need to consider though really is, are you really actually spinning out in 5311? Because those chain rings, they're not the cheapest of things. And well, 5311, if you had a cadence of 100 revolutions per minute, well, you'd be going in excess of 60 kilometers an hour, which I guess is over 40 miles an hour, about 45 miles an hour, roughly, something like that. So is the extra expense really worth it? And how often do you really spin out on it? Because when I think spinning out, I think 140 RPM plus. But yeah, it will work absolutely fine, but just bear that in mind before you go splashing out on that bigger chainring. Next up, we've got Lewis Sordy, who says, hey John, I want to change from a 50-34 to a 52-36 chainring configuration. Will I have to put a new chain on or just reset the derailleur screws and such like? Right, it all depends really on how short or how long your current chain is. What I would do is go out and buy yourself a new chain anyway, because you're going to need it at some point. But first up, fit on that chain set and then see. So if the chain is too short, the reason or the way you'll be able to detect this, put it onto the big chainring and the biggest sprocket at the rear. I know we shouldn't be in that gear necessarily. And see if that rear derailleur is really extended forward. If it's so tight and that it's difficult to change back down onto a smaller chainring or a smaller sprocket at the rear, then yeah, you do need to use a longer chain. But generally, well, we don't tend to actually break or join our chains so they're that short. They tend to have a little bit of slack in them, so it should be absolutely fine. And of course, if it is too short, well, you can just go ahead and put on that new chain that you've already bought. Next up is Liam Bergin, who says, hi John, I've got a question regarding using a wall mount because I've got limited living space for my bike. I've got standard quick release wheels. Is it bad long term for them and also for the quick releases themselves? I always do the normal checks before riding. Cheers. Right, it's good that you always do those checks before you ride because loads of people out there don't. They just put their bike back, go out on it and then discover a problem somewhere along the line. But yeah, it's absolutely fine to store your bike up there like that. Unless of course you are suspending it from the spokes themselves. So make sure that the little hook or whatever fixing it is isn't actually resting on a spoke because you could well bend that, therefore leading to early fatigue of it or something. And also if your bike was really, really heavy, I guess it could play a bit of a part on it, but no one I don't think has got a bike that heavy, or have they? Also, some people reckon that if they keep bikes stored, vertically on a wall, that the hydraulic brake fluid has problems. So it like all rises up or sinks down, and they get bad performing brakes or anything. Brake systems are sealed, so I don't really know how that happens. I guess it could happen on some systems out there, but I think they're very few and far between. But ultimately, you are going to be absolutely fine to do that. And I know what it's like to have, well, not enough living room for your bikes. Next up is Tristan, who says, John, my bike keeps making a weird clicking noise when I'm out of the saddle. The noise is definitely coming from the front and seems to be with the rhythm of swinging the bike from side to side. Oh yeah, that old chestnut, the old clicking bike. Right, firstly, make sure that all of the bolts on the stem and handlebars, brake levers where they're attached onto the bars, are all done up to the correct torque and using either anti-seize, grease. Also, sometimes you have to use carbon paste in between the stem and the bars if you've got carbon bars, something like that, to try and stop them creaking a little bit, any fraction of movement. Something which loads of people get plagued with is this creaking noise from the front wheel. And what it can be is the actual inside of the dropout. So you're looking at the fork from side on. So you're looking at your bike side on, like in the bike vault. And there it is, there's the fork dropout where the axle's going to go. Get yourself my favourite ingredient, you know what it is by now. The cameraman, he knows what it is, it's a dab of grease. So get yourself a dab of grease, rub it around the inside of that dropout, get it nicely covered. Not too much, don't go crazy with it. No one likes to go crazy with grease, but just put a dab of grease in there, both sides, and refit the front wheel. Do up the quick release skewer to a decent torque, go back out, have a little play around, dance up those mountains, pretending that you're Chris Froome or whoever you want to be on the ride, and see if that clicking or creaking goes away. Penultimate question this week comes in from Samuel Petrina, who says, I have an old Nashiki bike with a 10-speed Ultegra group set. No matter what I do to the B tension screw, I can't get the jockey wheel close enough to the cassette for good shifting. Right, so a B tension screw on a rear derailleur basically controls how close the upper pulley wheel can get to the cassette, because that allows for more precise shifting, if you like. But not all rear derailleurs have them anymore. But this one does, obviously, as you can see here, there is one there. This one is a mountain bike rear derailleur. I've just borrowed from the GMBN guys. Hopefully they don't mind. But what I reckon your problems here are is you will have inside of that 10-speed Ultegra rear mech, there's a spring inside of the actual derailleur hanger bolt. So that was this one here, this one up there. And then you can see here, there's another bolt which goes in through there. It's just up by the upper pulley wheel. So what happens is they get absolutely full of gunk over the years, and they need to be essentially disassembled, cleaned up, and then the springs have to go back in the same positions, or you can put them in a different position for a little bit of extra spring power, if you like, so for really snappy gear shifts. I always just put them back where the manufacturer says. It's not that simple to go through. You do need to pay close attention to the disassembly of it to make sure you put them back in the right places and also the right way round. The spring does look quite similar, but they're not. Some of them have longer tabs than others. But in essence, I would head over actually to the Park Tool website, where they've got a really comprehensive guide on how to take apart a rear derailleur for overhaul. Maybe I should do that actually in the future, so you can actually get to grips with them, because it's a problem out there which loads of people do tend to have with an older rear derailleur. And what happens is they just stay stuck in one place. So the rear derailleur arm, it doesn't really move at all. It just stays like that cage, and it just moves across like so when you change gear, rather than really accommodating the slack in the chain. So yeah, have a look on that website and you should be absolutely fine to go ahead and give your rear mech an overhaul. And the final question comes in from Christopher Santos, who says, Hi John, as a beginner cyclist, should I totally slam my stem to the point that there are no places for spacers to be used, or should I put one spacer in? Many thanks. Christopher, get on that bike so you are comfortable, my friend. As a beginner, you want to be really comfortable because you want to be riding that bike. If you're uncomfortable, you're not going to want to ride it, let's face it. So the best thing to do, either join a local club, go and see a local bike fitter, someone like that who can get you on that bike ever so comfortable. As you become more experienced, although it's more difficult as we get old really, because they're not quite as flexible, you can get into that more aggressive position and maybe have your stem slam. But don't go ahead and do it just because you think it looks cool or someone else has told you to do it, or you see the pros doing it. That doesn't work for everybody out there. So like I say, go along, try and find someone who can help you with your position first and foremost. And yeah, I mean, yeah, it does look good, I've got to admit, having a slam stem, but you just need to be comfortable. A few years back, I had an injury and I actually had to raise my bars 2 centimetres higher than what they previously were. But before, it was always slammed because I've been riding and racing my bike for years and years. Went up 2 centimetres. As my injury went, I could just gradually drop it back down to that lowest position again. But don't go ahead and do it just because you think it looks good or someone's told you to do it. There we are, another GCN Tech Clinic done. and dusted. But if you've got a problem, leave it for me down there in the comments section below and I'll do my very best to help answer it. Alternatively, leave it on all forms of social media using the hashtag AskGCNTech. And also, remember to like and share this video with your friend. Make sure you subscribe to that channel too by clicking the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you get alerted each and every time we put a video live. Don't forget, also check out the GCN shop at shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com. We've got a whole heap of goodies, especially for that big race in July. And now for 2 more great videos, how about clicking just down here and just down here.